Hello and welcome to Frontrunner Motorsport, and today was the Canadian Grand Prix. In fact, it finished just over half an hour ago, and it was a bizarre race. In fact, it was a bizarre weekend, but it was pretty exciting, and I really enjoyed this one, and we got some odd results. Max Verstappen has won the last two F1 races in Canada, and even after his recent troubles, he's going to win a third. But the not so odd result was Max Verstappen winning again, and I don't think it's really said enough. In fact, I think it's taken for granted a little bit just how well he drove in this race and other races this year. This victory didn't just fall in his lap. He qualified second with the exact same time as George Russell, which was incredible. And with Verstappen, it was just he had the pace and he made the moves when it mattered. He had the pace on the dry tyres to get past Norris when Norris pitted. He managed to get ahead of Russell, I think that was in the pit stops. It was just a mistake-free, brilliant drive from Max Verstappen once again, in very difficult conditions as well. That's not to take away from George Russell, who did an amazing job to get pole position. This race just did not fall his way. He did make a couple of mistakes, but he did very well to get back past Lewis Hamilton for a podium at the end of the race. And I think if the race had just been cleaner and maybe events fell nicer in his lap, then we could be talking about George Russell's second Formula 1 win. As it happens, it just didn't go down that way. Lando Norris as well. Tables have been turned and the safety car just didn't fall his way. And it was still another brilliant drive from Lando, who I still think is a title contender this year. I think Lando especially has proven that Max Verstappen hasn't got it all his own way, and he could still be a threat. There's plenty of time for him to win more races. As for the rest of the field, we'll start with qualifying, because qualifying was very interesting. Sergio Perez has signed a new contract with Red Bull, which I think is the biggest mistake Red Bull have ever made. And, you know, to celebrate, he qualifies down the back of the field. He's out in Q1, and honestly his weekend was not going to get any better. And the Ferraris as well failed to make it out of Q2, and their weekend did not go great. Big surprise for me though was Lewis Hamilton qualifying 7th, because he looked like he had the pace for top 3 and his lap just didn't come together. It's just, there was a but George Russell on pole and Lewis Hamilton in 7th, when I think that Mercedes had pace. I think that cost Lewis Hamilton the race as well. I think he could have ended his winless drought, his win drought I suppose, with a better qualifying position here, because he got stuck behind Alonso for a very long time, and then he was sort of just at a disadvantage to the cars in front. Did a fine job to get past Piastri, and again, I don't think Hamilton made any mistakes. I think he went off once, but I think it was a fairly decent drive from Hamilton. But I do think both Mercedes drivers could have done better this weekend, and it's really just the luck didn't go their way. So this was a wet race, at least to start with. It was damp, and I was very impressed that there was no contact at the start. No one drove into each other, no one did anything stupid, and Magnussen will get a penalty for something. We got a brilliant run from the Haas drivers. Magnussen, who I said would get a penalty, he did not get a penalty, but he did get up to 4th, and it was brave of them to start on wets, and it seemed to do them a world of good. But I think Magnussen, when he pitted, it was obviously Magnussen's call and the team weren't ready for him. If they had better communication, have that pit stop ready, even if they had to wait a lap, I think he would have been 3 or 4 places better off, and that would have made it worth it. I think Hülkenberg stayed out way too long on his wets. It just killed his race. No points for Haas this weekend, but at least they gave it a go. Obviously, the big talking point of this race is Ferrari. Charles Leclerc having engine issues. They made a gamble onto the dries way too early, and then they retired the car anyway. It was just a mess for Leclerc. Nothing went his way this weekend. And Sainz, even, mistakes can be made in qualifying that just he didn't work and he got knocked out in Q2. Fine. Ferrari, they should make progress through the race, and it just wasn't happening. So it's just a case that they did not have the car underneath them at this Grand Prix. But Sainz had a terrible race. He really struggled to make any progress through the field. Once it dried, he did start to, but then he spun and took out Albon and himself. Williams as well had a terrible race with both Albon and Sargent retiring. Sargent, who went off twice and was way slower than anyone else anyway. And I'm honestly not surprised Williams are looking to replace Sargent, with Carlos Sainz Jr. being the top candidate. Sainz would be an amazing signing. Sainz and Albon at Williams, it would boost them into the midfield. Honestly, if they had that this year, they would be ahead of Alpine and Stake and Haas. Probably challenging Aston Martin. Not quite on their level, but between RB and Aston Martin, definitely. Sargent, it's just not working. He hasn't had a great run in Formula 1. And if you're the Williams driver who's getting binned after 2 seasons, it's very easy when you're the unimpressive Williams driver to be completely forgotten in motorsport. Because if you look at it, Nicholas Latifi ain't up to much these days, and Sergei Sirotkin. There are others, I'm sure, but recently, if you're the second Williams driver, you need to get some decent results underneath you. It doesn't always work out like George Russell's or Albon's or Lance Stroll's, I guess, in a way. So I think Sargent should be very worried about his future, but honestly, he's good. I can see him racing in the IMSA, possibly IndyCar. If he wants to do NASCAR, he could do it. That's just his American options. He could do Formula E. He could do World Endurance. There's a lot of top opportunities for good drivers, and Logan Sargent is good. It's just, I don't think he's Formula 1 quality. Everything else, Perez crashed in the race as well. Honestly, with him signing his contract this weekend, I honestly think Red Bull should have put Tsunoda in that car next year and put Liam Lawson in the RB. I think Perez and Ricciardo did score points this weekend. Even, I think, being criticised by Jacques Villeneuve may have gunned him up and really got him sort of motivated for this one. Because, you know, Jacques Villeneuve says anything, it's pretty insulting. And I think, honestly, I'm looking at Red Bull and RB. I think Perez and Ricciardo, it's just, they outstayed their welcome. I say this pretty much every Grand Prix weekend, but I would like to see Verstappen and Tsunoda in the Red Bull and Lawson and, I don't know, Iwasa or Hauger in the RB. Or Hadjar, he's pretty good this year. Honestly, I'd honestly give anyone a chance. Because I thought the point of RB was it was like a junior team to give drivers experience, like Max Verstappen, Carlos Sainz, and Daniel Ricciardo raced a Toro Rosso as well, didn't he? Sebastian Vettel. Those drivers came up through Toro Rosso, AlphaTauri, RB, whatever, and that was a pretty good system. And hiring someone like Daniel Ricciardo, I think it honestly goes against the point of having a second team. Other than that, no big shocks really in the championship. Max Verstappen will still lead easily. Norris is still pressing him. I think Mercedes, the best they can hope for is to close up on Ferrari, and this race did help them with that. It was a good job from Russell and Hamilton. They did well. Piastri did a good job. Alonso and Stroll, it was a pretty quiet race for Aston Martin, and honestly, Lance Stroll just finishing in the points is good for his 2024 campaign, because it hasn't been great up to this point. Alonso, I think he'll be disappointed that Aston Martin aren't where they were last year, but at least he's scoring points. Behind them, Gasly and Ocon, they'll just, again, like Alpine have had such a terrible start to 2024, they'll just be happy to score points as well. And I think the likes of Hülkenberg, Magnussen, Bottas, just outside the points, they can be disappointed. Tsunoda made a mistake at the end. He was on 4 points again. And I do think he's one of the top drivers of 2024. But he should be disappointed with this one. Zhou, just nowhere. And honestly, Stake, I think they're making it very difficult for their drivers this year. But that was the Canadian Grand Prix. It was very interesting. I did enjoy it. It was a very strange race, but a lot did happen in this one. In a couple of weeks, we are back in Europe, in Austria. I do take issue with the calendar. I can't see why we have gone from Miami earlier in the year to Europe and Imola, and then back to Canada, and then we're going back to Europe with Austria, and Monaco was before Canada, but it's all over the place. And I thought sustainability and environmentalism were something Formula One was going to be taking into account. I honestly think they really need to reorganise their calendar a little bit, and I'm sure they will in the future, but it is a bit all over the place right now. But our next race is in a couple of weeks' time at the Austrian Grand Prix. We have Le Mans 24 hours before that, which I am really looking forward to. I am going to be watching the whole thing. I may even live stream, do like a watch party sort of thing in the early hours of the morning. So if you're awake at that time, then you can jump in and say hi. I will be back with more content in the week, so make sure you subscribe. Thank you very much for watching. Let me know what you thought of the Canadian Grand Prix, and most importantly of all, have a good one.